From the characters in the show lacking depth to a plotline that sounds incredibly absurd, here's why Kaley Cuoco's new TV series sucks. Despite its very serious name, the show boasts a plotline so absurd that it could only have been made up. Kaley and Chris Messina star as this married couple who are stuck in a rut, and their luck's in the dumpster in terms of their careers and finances. They're surrounded by rich people but work jobs in service to them. Kaley's Ava is a realtor who's dealing with one-bed apartments, instead of the more glamorous mansions that bring in big commissions. Chris's Nathan is a former tennis pro struggling to find purpose, and has resorted to teaching tennis to housewives and bored rich kids at the country club. The two have a decent life, but they can barely afford the mortgage on their Mar Vista house, which has left them disappointed and unsatisfied. While Ava may be a real estate agent, her one passion in life is true crime. The character feeds directly into the whole gossipy mom stereotype, with her life constantly being narrated by a true crime podcast. Guess what she loves doing? Sitting down with a glass of wine, sharing gory crime details with her friends. So predictable. And Ava's also expecting her first child, just like Cuoco in real life, which only adds to Nathan's overwhelming anxiety. Their average home with its average problems turns upside down when Ava finds out that their new plumber Matt is an active serial killer. You seriously can't make this stuff up. So, what would a true crime-obsessed person do if they came across a serial killer? Definitely not start a podcast with them. No, really. Ava's thoughts don't turn to the police or getting justice, but instead decide that having Matt in a tell-all podcast is the best way to go about this. That is the incredibly unrealistic and hyped-up plot for the show. But I guess they had to make it longer than one single episode, so something's gotta give. Now, Kaley's performance as Ava feels very familiar. As the flight attendant and Big Bang Theory highlighted, Cuoco knows how to play the girl next door trope, and we're all clear on that. In Based on a True Story, she does more of the same, and anyone hoping to see some range from the actress will definitely be disappointed. It's more or less a snooze fest in terms of the acting. The show also tends to overuse some of its plot devices at times, and it's gory in a way that feels distasteful, especially given the genre it's supposed to be inspired from. Like that scene in the pilot when the show jumps back 2 weeks and shows a woman working out in front of a video mirror only to be stabbed by someone. Her blood gets spattered everywhere during the workout session, and it's not funny, and it definitely doesn't feel ominous enough, so it ends up coming off as plain ugly. Sure, the violence is gory, but it's also very disturbing considering this is supposed to be a comedy. Even a dog's killed, but thankfully off-screen, which makes for a very impactful and highly upsetting scene, especially if you're into dogs. Some fans were so disturbed by that scene that they hoped the show would get canceled. The West Los Angeles setting isn't too bad of an idea though, since it provides a nice detour from the usual Hollywood crime dramas. But halfway through the show's first season, the attempts to shock the audience get old real quick. And frankly, it's really annoying. There are very few original ideas, and they're overused a lot. Creator Craig Rosenberg of The Boys fame has made the show's approach too superficial, and the characters suffer because of it. While there's plenty to say about the money-making side of true crime as a genre, Ava and Nathan are nothing short of annoying and shallow, because they're more interested in fame, money, and ratings, instead of having a conscience about the murders happening around them. The one character who could have made the show interesting was Matt, and even though he had a central role in the series, they failed to make the most of him. Based on a True Story, thought it'd be best to make his character a funny one, as a cold-blooded killer who just wants to throw darts with his new bestie, Nathan. What the show doesn't do is fill in any details or context that might interfere with Matt's ability to be used for pure laughs. Other than the fact that we barely get to hear this podcast, Matt never even gets to explain why he does what he does or how he feels about it. I mean, that would have made for a more interesting podcast conversation, no? He has a young son who's barely mentioned and a wife who never enters the picture at all. This seems like a missed opportunity because the show could have taken a deep dive into Matt's family dynamics and provided some background on what led him to become a serial killer. Maybe the mom was his first victim. Maybe it was an accident and he turned out to love the feeling. Now that's something interesting to watch. As he continues to make impulsive and rash decisions, dragging Nathan and Ava along with him and implicating them in his crimes, Matt's presence in the show feels more like a plot driver instead of a central character. Coming back to the podcast itself, it becomes a minor detail by the second half of the show, with the characters' twisted lives and relationships becoming the central plot. The writing feels lazy here because they honestly could have done a lot with that angle. And with all the chaos happening in each episode, the show just ends up feeling messy and disconnected. Plus, much like Matt's son, Ava's sister Tori is also barely mentioned, and her overall role in the story gets more and more confusing. Someone really needs to tell me what the writers were trying to achieve with her. The supporting cast also seems very undeveloped, with Priscilla Quintana and Aaron Stone bringing weird energy. They pose as the rich couple whose open marriage isn't exactly the role model for couples. While their performances might help the audience go through 8 short episodes, they can't really make up for the badly done scripts, but maybe they just did the best they could with the material they had. Based on a True Story feels unsatisfying, not only because the season ended so abruptly, but also because it had almost nothing about the genre it's supposed to be critiquing. Where's all the commentary on America's unhealthy obsession with true crime? The premise had us believing they would at least deliver on that. The biggest problem by far is that after a clever scene involving a trip to LA's true crime convention, the show falls into a boring, old, predictable rut of threatened blackmail and violence that throws any credibility it had previously built right out the window. Take Ava and Nathan's marriage in this case. Married for 10 years and about to have their first child, the two are so disconnected by the stresses brought on by their work lives. The series has a particularly bad habit of suddenly diving into these fantasy scenes, where both the central characters are daydreaming about being with someone else, only for the audience to be reminded that it's all in their heads. It feels like a total gimmick, an overused and irritating one, since the shock value turns out to be something they just made up. It feels like the series is only willing to explore its characters' flaws in the form of role play. It's a bit of a cheap tactic to continue to shock the audience. Even after finishing season 1, I didn't feel the need to wait for a second season, and that speaks for itself. But if you're looking for a less than average watch, the show's enough to pass your time. But don't say I didn't tell you that the characters lack depth, the writing feels bland, and the plot is too ridiculous to believe in the first place. The angle of true crime satire in this is disappointing at best. While some punchlines do tend to thrive when they're given room to land, most of the others just try to swim, but sink instead. But if you're the kind of person who can get past the ridiculousness of it all, that sane people decide to help a serial killer so they can make money off of a podcast, you might just enjoy this. So there you have it, from the characters lacking depth to a plotline that sounds incredibly absurd. That's why Kaley Cuoco's new TV series sucks.